My wife slapped me for coming home late from work. She never expected my very next move. I was a logistics coordinator. I managed freight, routes, timelines, and contingencies for a living. I knew better than anyone that the moment something goes off course, you don't react, you track. So when Annie Borby met me at the door at midnight and put her hand across my face before I could say 3 words, I didn't explode. I didn't follow her upstairs. I stood in that hallway and I started tracking. What I found in the next 72 hours, the secret Thursdays, the Montrose address, the hidden condo, the man she never stopped loving, would have destroyed a man who moved too fast. But I am Gus Party's son. And Gus Party's son never moves before he sees the whole board. Viewers, before you continue, please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories. My name is Borby Party. I'm a 38-year-old senior logistics coordinator for a freight company in Houston, Texas, and until 6 weeks ago, I believed I was living a life most men would envy. I had a 3-bedroom house in Katy, a stable career, a dog named Rue who greeted me every evening like I'd returned from war, and a wife, Annie Borby, who made Sunday breakfasts from scratch and remembered every anniversary without being reminded. 9 years of marriage. 9 years of what I thought was a quiet, unshakable love, the kind that doesn't make noise because it doesn't need to. I met Annie at a mutual friend's cookout in 2014. She was laughing at something across the yard, head thrown back, completely unaware I was watching. I decided in that moment, before I even knew her name, that I wanted to be the reason she laughed like that. For a long time, I thought I was. I wasn't a perfect husband. I worked long hours. I brought the freight yard home in my silences sometimes, carried stress like cargo I forgot to unload at the door. But I was faithful. I was present. I showed up, and I thought showing up was enough. My father, Gus Party, used to say that a man who keeps his word and comes home every night has done the sacred minimum. I believed him. I built my marriage on that foundation without ever asking whether the ground beneath it was still solid. I should have checked. I should have noticed the small withdrawals, not financial ones, not yet, but emotional ones. The way Annie stopped reaching for my hand during movies. The way her laughter changed pitch when she was on her phone in the other room. The way she started wearing perfume on Thursday evenings without telling me where she was going. I noticed all of it. I filed it under marriage fatigue and kept moving. That was my first mistake, and I was about to pay for it with everything. I came home on a Thursday night and my life changed in the span of 3 seconds. The clock above the hallway mirror read 11:47 p.m. when I pushed open the front door, and Annie was already standing there, not sitting on the couch, not calling from upstairs, but standing directly in the hallway, arms folded across her chest, silk robe tied tight, like she'd been positioned there for hours. The overhead light was harsh and unflattering and it made the whole scene feel clinical, like something being documented. I remember thinking, even in that moment, that she looked beautiful in a way that made me sad. Work had swallowed the day whole. A freight audit had collapsed mid-morning when 3 shipment manifests came back flagged for discrepancies, and my warehouse supervisor, a reliable man named Doug, had called out sick at noon, leaving me to cover a floor I hadn't physically managed in 2 years. I'd texted Annie at 6:30 p.m. I texted again at 9:15. Both messages showed delivered. Neither showed read. I told myself she was sleeping. I told myself a lot of things on that drive home. When she asked where I'd been, her voice was flat and carefully constructed, like she'd rehearsed the temperature of it. I opened my mouth, the audit, Doug, the Denver reroute, and before the third word formed, her right hand came across my face so fast I stumbled sideways into the doorframe. The sound cracked through the hallway like something snapping. Rue scrambled off the couch in the next room. I straightened slowly. My cheek burned in a perfect, spreading ring. I didn't shout. I didn't reach for her wrist. I stood completely still and looked at this woman I had shared every ordinary and extraordinary moment with for 9 years, and something shifted in my chest, not broke, shifted, like a door moving off its hinge. She held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned and walked upstairs without a single word. I stood in that hallway alone. Rue pressed his nose against my knee. I looked down at my phone, and saw a calendar notification I had never created. The notification glowed on my screen in the dark hallway, and I read it 3 times before my brain fully accepted what my eyes were seeing. Thursday, 9 p.m., confirm. A recurring calendar reminder, every Thursday for 11 weeks, created from Annie's account on the Google Calendar we shared for bill due dates and Rue's vet appointments. I hadn't created it. I had never seen it before that moment. I stood there with an ice pack pressed against my cheek and scrolled through the entry with the careful slowness of a man who understands that what he's about to find cannot be unfound. No location attached. No description. No visible guest invites. But the color coding was wrong, tagged under a secondary calendar I didn't recognize, labeled simply AP, personal. 2 initials that reached into my chest and squeezed. Annie's maiden name was Annie Pruitt. Before Houston, before me, before the cookout where I watched her laugh across a yard and decided she was it, she had lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she had been engaged to a man named Colt. She'd mentioned him exactly once, early in our relationship, in the careful and abbreviated way people mention things they've decided to bury. The engagement ended. She never explained why. I asked twice in our first 2 years and both times she went somewhere behind her eyes that I couldn't follow, so I stopped asking. I filed it under her past and left it there. Standing in my own hallway at midnight with a handprint on my face, I was no longer sure I'd been right to leave it. I moved to the guest bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub. I opened Annie's Amazon order history. We shared the account, had for years, one of those small domestic mergers that feels like intimacy. 6 weeks ago, a purchase I didn't recognize. 1 bottle of men's cologne. A brand I had never worn. Delivered to our house. No gift occasion I could identify. No birthday. No anniversary. I set the phone face down on the tile and sat in the silence for a long time. I didn't sleep. By 5 a.m. I was already at the freight office, 2 hours before the first dispatcher arrived, sitting at my desk with a personal laptop open and the overhead lights still off. The glow of the screen made the room feel underwater. I told myself I was being irrational. I told myself tired men see patterns that aren't there, that a calendar reminder and a bottle of cologne weren't evidence of anything except a wife who had a private life, which was normal, which was healthy, which I had always said I respected. I told myself all of that and then I opened the GPS tracking application anyway. It had been a company perk introduced during the pandemic, a civilian-facing fleet tracker extended to senior coordinators and their families, framed as a safety measure during uncertain times. Annie and I had installed it on each other's phones in 2020 and then forgotten it existed the way you forget about a smoke detector until the moment you desperately need one. Her location history loaded slowly, Thursday by Thursday, and I watched the data arrange itself into a shape I recognized immediately as the shape of a secret. Every Thursday for the past 3 weeks, Annie had left our house in Katy at 8:15 p.m. She had driven 22 minutes northeast. She had stopped at the same address in Houston's Montrose neighborhood and remained there between 90 minutes and 2 full hours before driving home. The same address. Every single Thursday. I typed it into Google Maps with 2 fingers, like I was handling something fragile. A short-term rental property on a tree-lined street in Montrose, photographed in warm golden light on the listing page, the kind of place that looked deliberately romantic. I wrote the address on a legal notepad in blue ink. I wrote it slowly, pressing hard, the way my father had taught me to write things that mattered. Gus Party believed that if something was worth knowing, it was worth making permanent. I was starting to understand what he meant. Outside the office windows, Houston was turning orange at the edges, the city waking up completely indifferent to what I'd just found. I went home that evening and I performed a husband. That is the only honest way I know to describe what I did. I performed the role with the muscle memory of 9 years, hitting every mark, every beat, every familiar domestic note, while underneath I was completely somewhere else. Annie had made lasagna. The good kind, layered and heavy, the recipe she'd learned from her grandmother in Charlotte and only made when she was feeling generous or guilty. I know now which one it was that night. She was warm at dinner, almost luminous, asking about the audit with what sounded like genuine interest, laughing at a story about Phyllis from her office and the broken printer that had jammed 17 times in a single afternoon. She poured my wine without being asked. She kissed me on the cheek, the same cheek, and her lips were warm and her perfume was familiar, and for exactly 4 seconds I let myself wonder if I had imagined everything. Then I remembered the cologne. I remembered the Montrose address. I smiled and asked for more lasagna. My father came to me then, the way he often does in moments that require stillness. Gus Party was a man who moved fast and lost everything because of it. When I was 13, he discovered my mother had been keeping a separate savings account, nothing dramatic, a few $1,000s, her private cushion against uncertainty, and he exploded before he understood. He said unretractable things. He made accusations that were half wrong and delivered them with the certainty of a man who was completely right. They were divorced before my 14th birthday. He spent the next 20 years describing that week as the worst of his life, not because of what my mother had done, but because of how he'd responded to it. He told me once, "Borby, the worst thing a man can do is move before he can see the whole board." I heard him clearly that night across the lasagna and the candlelight and Annie's warm performance. When she fell asleep, her phone buzzed twice on the nightstand. The preview read, "Thursday still good? I got us something." I set the phone back exactly where it was. On Saturday morning I rented a Ford Fusion from a lot on the west side of Houston, paid with a prepaid Visa I'd bought with cash at a gas station on Friday afternoon. I wore a baseball cap I hadn't worn in 3 years and drove to Montrose with a coffee in the cup holder and something in my chest that had gone very quiet and very cold. I parked across the street from the rental property at 9:10 a.m. and I waited. This is the part people always find hard to believe when I tell the story, that I sat there for nearly 2 hours without moving, without music, without anything except coffee going lukewarm and the sound of a Saturday neighborhood waking up around me. But I had made a decision in the dark of my bedroom 2 nights earlier that I was not going to be my father. I was not going to move until I could see the whole board. At 11:20 a.m., the front door of the property opened. The man who walked out stopped me cold in a way I hadn't fully anticipated, because knowing something intellectually and seeing it standing in morning sunlight 20 yards away are 2 entirely different experiences. I recognized him from a photograph I had seen exactly once, a New Year's Eve group shot from 2009, a photo Annie had closed quickly when I'd found it in an old album early in our marriage, explaining it away as "people from before." His name, I would confirm later that afternoon, was Colt Findley. He had a dry cleaning bag over one shoulder and a phone pressed to his ear, and he was laughing in the loose, unhurried way of a man who had nowhere urgent to be and nothing pressing to hide. He got into a black Audi Q5 and pulled away from the curb without once looking in my direction. I photographed the vehicle and noted the plate number. Then I called Raymond Osei, my college roommate from Texas Southern, now a private investigator based in Dallas, and told him I needed him to start Monday. Raymond went quiet for a moment and then said the last thing I expected, "Borby, someone already called me about you." Raymond and I met at a diner in Midtown Houston on Sunday morning, a narrow booth near the back where the coffee was strong and the tables were far enough apart to have a conversation that wasn't anyone else's business. He looked the same as he always did, measured, unhurried, the kind of man who processed information the way good engines process fuel, completely and without waste. He told me that 3 weeks earlier, a woman had contacted his office and retained him anonymously, payment made through a prepaid arrangement, to conduct a discreet investigation into my daily movements and professional associations. She wanted to know if I was having an affair. The irony was so complete it almost had a shape. I asked if it was Annie. Raymond shook his head. The voice was different, he said. Younger. But whoever she was, she knew my employer, my schedule, my home address, and the name of my direct supervisor at the freight company. That level of detail didn't come from a stranger. I knew immediately. Annie's closest friend from college was a woman named Bridget Sauer, now living in Austin, the kind of effortlessly warm person who sent actual birthday cards and remembered the names of your coworkers. Annie spoke to Bridget nearly every day. I had always liked Bridget. I had trusted her the way you trust the infrastructure of someone you love, without examination, because it had never given you a reason to doubt it. Raymond slid a printed call log across the table. I recognized the Austin area code before I finished reading the number. I sat with that for a moment, Bridget hiring a private investigator to assess my fidelity, 3 weeks ago, right as the Thursday appointments were already underway. She was either acting on Annie's instructions to verify I had no suspicion, or she was running interference for a woman she'd decided to protect regardless of what that protection cost. Either way, I had been surveilled before I ever began watching. Raymond told me I'd come back clean in his report. Then he placed a second document beside the first, something he'd found while working the case, something I hadn't asked for. A property deed. Harris County. Filed 4 months ago. Annie's maiden name on the title. I sat in the rental car outside the diner while rain started tapping against the windshield, and I read the deed twice in the gray, flat light of a Houston Sunday. A condominium in the Midtown neighborhood. 1,100 square feet. Purchased 4 months ago under the name Annie Pruitt, her pre-marriage name, the name she had legally kept as a professional alias, the name I had always found romantic in a way I now understood was naive. The purchase had been funded by a wire transfer from a financial account I had never seen, never been told about, never encountered in 9 years of shared finances. We had a joint checking account. A joint savings. A joint investment portfolio that I reviewed every Monday morning with the methodical habit of a man who believed transparency was the same thing as loyalty. There was no missing money in any of those accounts. Which meant the account funding this condo had existed in complete parallel to our financial life together, siloed and invisible, possibly for years. My hands were trembling slightly for the first time since Thursday night, and I noticed that and made myself breathe through it. I called Annie's younger brother, Theo, who had been closer to me than to his own sister for most of our marriage, a gentle, precise man who worked in urban planning in Austin and had been the best man at our wedding because Annie had no one else she trusted more. When he answered, his voice was careful in a way that told me he'd been waiting for this call. I asked him how long he'd known. He asked which part one meant, the condo, or Colt. I told him to start from the beginning and he did, and what he told me rearranged the timeline of my marriage into something I barely recognized. Colt Findlay had reappeared 18 months ago through a LinkedIn message. What began as reconnection had progressed within 4 months into something Theo described with the measured discomfort of a man reporting a car accident he'd witnessed and hadn't been able to prevent. He emailed me a folder while we were still on the phone. Inside were screenshots. In one, Annie had written, "Borby doesn't know who he's married to anymore. Maybe he never did." I called my attorney. Stuart Mbay's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Houston, clean-lined and deliberately calm, the kind of space designed to make difficult conversations feel manageable. I sat across from him on a Thursday evening, not the Thursday Annie had reserved for Montrose, a different one, my Thursday now, with Raymond's documentation, Theo's screenshots, the GPS history, the property deed, and the financial investigator's preliminary report spread across the glass table between us like a case being assembled, which is exactly what it was. Stuart was the best matrimonial attorney in Harris County and he had the quality I valued most in a person operating on my behalf. He didn't perform outrage on my behalf, he simply worked. He reviewed everything methodically, asked 3 clarifying questions, and then looked up at me with the expression of a man who has seen most things and is rarely impressed and said, "She doesn't know you know any of this." I confirmed that she didn't. He said that Annie had filed preliminary divorce paperwork 2 weeks earlier. She hadn't served me yet. She was timing it, waiting, I understood now, until the financial architecture was fully in place, until the condo was secured and the account was established and she had satisfied herself that I had no suspicion and no defense prepared. She had been constructing a controlled demolition of our marriage with the patience and precision of someone who had planned this for a long time. The slap in the hallway, Stuart agreed when I described it, had the texture of a provocation. A test. She'd wanted to see if I would explode, give her an incident, give her grounds, hand her a narrative in which she was the wife leaving a volatile husband rather than the wife who had spent 18 months building an exit with another man. I had passed her test without knowing I was being graded. Now we were going to file first. Monday morning. Fault-based, citing adultery, which in Texas carries real weight in asset division proceedings, weight that would reach the condo, the hidden brokerage account, the marital home she had planned to leverage entirely on her own terms. I told Stuart to file. He paused then and said, "There's one more thing. She moved $47,000 out of the joint account yesterday afternoon. I had the joint account frozen at 9 p.m. Friday through an emergency motion Stuart filed and had approved within the hour, the $47,000 transfer flagged and reversed while under legal review. Annie didn't know yet. On Monday morning I put on a navy suit I hadn't worn since a colleague's retirement dinner 2 years earlier, made coffee in the kitchen, and stood at the counter in the early light listening to the house breathe around me the way houses do when they're still and full of accumulated time. Rue sat at my feet and watched me with the patient, liquid attention of a dog who understands more than he lets on. Annie came downstairs at 6:40 in her pajamas, hair loose, and stopped completely when she saw me dressed. The look on her face in that moment was not guilt, it was calculation, fast and instinctive, the rapid assessment of a person trying to determine how much a situation has changed without revealing that they're assessing it. I handed her a coffee. She took it. I was smiling, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just clearly, the way a man smiles when he has finally stopped pretending. She searched my face for what the smile meant and what she found there made her set the coffee down. I told her the papers had been filed at 8 a.m. through Stuart Mbay's office. I told her she'd hear from the bank about the transfer and from the county assessor about the Midtown condo. I mentioned Raymond Osei and told her that Bridget's decision to hire him 3 weeks ago had not produced the outcome anyone had intended, because Raymond had been my friend for 22 years and friendship, unlike marriage, apparently meant something. What I had not planned for, what no amount of legal preparation and documented evidence and strategic patience had prepared me for, was the grief. Not hers. Mine. Because standing in that kitchen watching the color drain from the face of the woman who had driven me to the emergency room at 2 a.m. during my kidney stone in 2018, who had held my hand at my father's funeral and cried harder than I did, I felt the full weight of what was ending. I picked up my briefcase. "I'm taking Rue," I said. I walked to the door. She said my name once, broken. I turned. "I know," I said. "That was your mistake." I closed the door. Colt Findlay called from an unknown number while I was pulling out of the driveway, and I answered because I had decided weeks earlier that if this moment came I would not avoid it. We met that same afternoon at a rooftop bar in downtown Houston, the city spread below us in every direction, ordinary and enormous and completely indifferent to two men sitting across from each other over a situation that had cost one of them everything. He was taller than I'd expected from the distance of that Saturday morning in Montrose, and he had the particular confidence of a man who had prepared for hostility and was visibly unsettled by receiving none. I ordered water. He ordered bourbon and didn't touch it. He told me he loved Annie. He said it directly, without decoration, and I gave him credit for that because directness in that moment cost him something and he offered it anyway. I told him that was entirely his situation to manage now. He said he was sorry for how things had unfolded, that he had never wanted it to happen this way. I asked him how he had wanted it to happen and he had no answer, which was the most honest thing that passed between us. I looked at him across the table and understood something clearly: he had not built this. He had walked through a door that Annie opened, and whatever came next between them was theirs to carry. I stood up and told him that whatever he was building with her, he should make sure he understood what the foundation looked like, because I had built 9 years on ground I had never once tested and I would not recommend the experience. I left him with the check. 6 weeks later I was living in an apartment in the Heights neighborhood of Houston with Rue asleep at my feet on a balcony, the city going gold below us in the evening light. The divorce had finalized faster than Stuart had predicted. Annie and Colt had moved into the Midtown condo. Theo and I talked every week. Bridget's voicemail I had listened to once and not returned. I was not healed and I was not broken and I was not sure yet what I was becoming, only that I was becoming it honestly. Then an email arrived from an unknown sender. Subject line: "You don't know the whole story about Colt Findlay. You should." I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the laptop, got up, and fed Rue. But I saved the email. Because Gus Party's son always documents the things that matter. Please subscribe, like, and share for more interesting stories.